There is a kind of cruelty that never raises its voice. It doesn't need to. It works through place cards and seating charts and the careful arrangement of furniture, and it is most effective precisely because it looks, to the uninformed eye, like nothing at all. Pull up a chair beside the fire, my dear friends, and let me tell you about an October evening in the town of York, Upper Canada, in the year 1823, when a woman named Catriona Lyle sat down at a small console table near a cold window, looked once at the arrangement Lady Brixton had made, and understood every word of it before the soup had been brought in. Miss Lyle had worked at Brixton House for 14 months. Her father, a Presbyterian minister from Inverness, had come to Upper Canada in 1810 with his young family and a trunk full of sermons and surveying books, believing the colony was a place where a man of modest means might build something worthwhile. He was not wrong about the colony. He was, however, wrong about his own constitution, and a fever in the summer of 1819 had settled the matter before his daughter had reached 25. Catriona had arranged his affairs, sold the small parcel of land in Ancaster he had been so proud of, and taken a position as corresponding secretary at Brixton House, because she was methodical and literate, and because there was nothing else in York at that time that would pay a woman of her situation enough to keep a room of her own. She managed Lady Brixton's correspondence with the particular efficiency of a person who is very good at their work, and very aware that being very good at their work is the only security they have. 14 months of letters written, accounts kept, seating arrangements organized, including tonight's. She had set every place card herself. She had not set the small console table near the window. That had been Lady Brixton's addition, discovered when Catriona returned from an errand an hour before the guests arrived. She understood the message before she reached her chair. Nothing Lady Brixton arranged was accidental. The guests of consequence occupied the main table, Justice Brixton at the head, his wife at the foot, and between them the evening's principal guest, the man for whom the good candles had been brought out and the cellar's best Madeira retrieved. Lord Carfax, Viscount Carfax, the King's Commissioner sent from London to review land grant disputes in Upper Canada. He had been in York 3 weeks, and had, by all accounts, been reviewing the colony's affairs with the unhurried precision of a man who arrived at conclusions by his own method, and could not be rushed toward anyone else's. At the console table beside the window, Catriona found Major General Barnaby Keir, who was 81 years old, had commanded a naval vessel on Lake Erie in the War of 1813, and was present this evening, because he had known Justice Brixton for 40 years, and because no one in York had yet worked out a polite way to stop inviting him. He was deaf in his right ear, and spoke with the confidence of a man who had spent a great deal of time outdoors and had learned to project accordingly. He looked up when Catriona sat beside him with the expression of a man who had not expected company. "The secretary, is it?" he said. "Lady Brixton's girl." "Miss Lyle," she said pleasantly. "Good evening, General Keir." He peered at her. "You're not meant to be at the main table, I take it." "I am exactly where I am meant to be," she said, which was true in every sense. He appeared to find this satisfactory. "Same as me, then," he said, without any particular bitterness, with the candor of a man who has made his peace with things. "Put me over here, so I don't shout across the Madeira. 30 years ago I'd have been offended. Now I prefer the window." He nodded toward the dark glass. "Lake's quiet tonight. You can almost hear it." Catriona looked. Beyond the candlelit room the harbour sat black and still beneath the stars. "What was it like?" she asked. "On the lake, in the war?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who has not been asked a sincere question in some time. "Cold," he said. "Magnificent. And cold. Do you want to hear about it?" "Very much," she said. He began immediately. At the head of the main table, Lord Carfax was performing the particular function of the evening's most consequential guest. Sitting at Lady Brixton's right hand, and allowing the table's energy to arrange itself around him, he was, by all accounts, a man of considerable intelligence and limited patience for social performance. And he had been sustaining the second of these all evening with the practiced correctness of someone who has learned that the alternative is worse. He was not, precisely, engaged with the conversation at the table's head. He was distracted. His companions would have said so, and they would not have been wrong, though they would have been wrong about the direction of his distraction. He had noticed Miss Liesel when she came in. Not specifically, not yet, the peripheral awareness of a new presence taking the chair at the side table. Then he had noticed the side table itself. Then he had noticed, with the slow attention of a man who is very good at reading a room, the particular deliberateness of its placement, away from the warmth near the draped window, furnished with the serviceable china rather than the good porcelain. He had glanced at Lady Brixton and read in her expression the specific satisfaction of a woman who has arranged something precisely and is content with the arrangement. Then he had watched Miss Lyle sit down, say something to old General Keir, and receive in return the expression of a man who has just been asked something he has long wanted to be asked. He had watched the General begin to speak. He had watched Miss Lyle lean slightly toward his good ear and attend to what he was saying with the full attention of a person who is genuinely interested. He reached for his wine. He thought, this evening is considerably more interesting than it appeared to be. The dinner proceeded as large colonial dinners proceed, which is to say with great formality and underlying anxiety, because everyone at the main table was aware that the man at Lady Brixton's right was deciding, quietly, which land claims to recommend to the Crown and which to set aside, and everyone therefore performed rather than conversed, which meant the conversation had the quality of a theatrical production, in which all the players knew their lines, but no one believed them. Lord Carfax was, by the third course, doing the social arithmetic of the evening, with one portion of his attention while the rest of it drifted, with increasing persistence, toward the console table by the window. It was during the pheasant that Mrs. Galton made her remark. Mrs. Galton was a woman of considerable standing in York. Her husband controlled 3 of the most significant import licenses in Upper Canada. She was seated at the table's upper third, which meant her words carried weight, and she delivered the remark with the easy confidence of a woman who believes she is simply sharing information. She said she had heard something interesting, something that had been circulating in York's better drawing rooms for the past week. There were letters, she said, correspondence bearing the Brixton House seal and stationery, apparently circulating among certain business interests in the town. Letters offering what appeared to be unofficial endorsements. On behalf of a Mr. Hartley. She said the name with the particular skill of a woman who knows precisely how much a name will cost the person it lands nearest to. Mr. Hartley, the land speculator, who had, 6 months prior, sold parcels in Markham that turned out to be already granted, and who was currently the subject of 2 formal complaints to the very Land Commission, whose Viscount Commissioner was seated at Lady Brixton's right hand. The table went still. Lady Brixton's colour left her face, not all at once, but in the specific manner of a woman who has understood the shape of a trap and is calculating whether there is a way out of it. Her son Geoffrey had had dealings with Hartley. That much was true. How much the room knew, how much Lord Carfax knew, was the terrible calculation. Mrs. Galton, in the silence, added, "Someone in the house would have had access to the stationery, of course. The seal. A person who manages correspondence. She did not look directly at the console table. She did not need to. The room understood. Rooms always do." Catriona set down her fork. She had heard every word from the window table. The General, absorbed in his account of the positioning of vessels at the Battle of Lake Erie, had not. She had the specific and inconvenient awareness of a person who holds the truth about something being made to sound like a lie, and who knows, furthermore, that she is the only person in the room who can say it plainly. She had it in the correspondence register. 14 months of every letter entering and leaving Brixton House, logged by her own hand. Date, recipient, nature of contents, whether sealed with the household seal. The seal had been used on 16 occasions in the past 6 months. She knew the date of each. She had written most of those letters herself. There were no letters to Hartley. There were no letters on Hartley's behalf. She knew this not as opinion but as fact, recorded, dated and sitting in the small ledger in her writing case upstairs. She said, from the console table near the window, in the clear and even voice of a woman, providing a factual correction to a factual error. I wonder if Mrs. Galton might be thinking of correspondence that originated elsewhere. I maintain the correspondence register for Brixton House. Every letter bearing this household seal is logged by my hand before it leaves. The seal has been used on 16 occasions since April. I can account for each. There is no correspondence to Mr. Hartley, or on his behalf in that register. She paused one moment. If such letters exist and bear this household seal, the seal was reproduced elsewhere. It did not come from here. The table produced a silence of the second kind, not the silence of people absorbing a damaging claim, but the silence of a room receiving a correction so specific and so calmly delivered that it arrived before the damage could settle, and that had, incidentally, protected the very household that had placed the speaker at a window table rather than a proper chair. Mrs. Galton recovered with the speed of long social practice. She looked the length of the room toward the console table with the expression of a woman reassessing the landscape and deciding on the quickest path across it. "How interesting," she said with a smile that reached nowhere useful. "Lady Brixton's secretary accounts for all the household correspondence. That must require considerable access." The silence that followed was a third kind. The kind in which a room decides what to do with a remark designed to undo a correction by impugning the woman who made it. Lord Carfax stood up. He did it without preamble, without the preliminary, that would have given the room time to prepare itself. He stood. He reached down and picked up his chair, the chair at Lady Brixton's right hand, the chair of the evening's guest of honor, and he carried it. He carried it past the Aldridge cousins seated midway down, past young Mr. Fenton with his wine-glass, past the Epergne and its candles burning in the autumn cold air. He carried it past the entire length of the main table and set it beside the console table at the window, beside the chair of Catriona Lyle and Major General Barnaby Keir. He sat in it. My dear friends, if you are listening to this by the fire tonight or in your car on the drive home through the dark, I want you to stay right here with me, because what happened in that dining room next is exactly the kind of thing I have been collecting these stories to tell you. And if this is the kind of evening you want more of, if this fire is one you want to return to, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Moonlight at Ravenwood. Every week another story. Every story, hard one. Now, back to York. Back to the man sitting calmly at the window table, and the room arranging itself around a new geometry it had not planned for. Lord Carfax looked at General Keir, he said, with the composure of a man who has moved his chair and is entirely prepared to account for it. "General, I understand you served on Lake Erie. I should very much like to hear about it." General Keir, who had missed the preceding several minutes due to the positioning of his right ear and the considerable engrossment of his own narrative, looked at the new arrival with the delighted surprise of a man whose audience has unexpectedly doubled. "Your Lordship," he said, "I was just telling Miss Lyle about the action in September of 13. "Please continue," Lord Carfax said. Lady Brixton had gone perfectly still. She had managed social rooms for 30 years. She had never seen anything precisely like this. The evening's most consequential guest was now seated at the servants' table, by apparent preference, listening to an old general describe the positioning of schooners on a colonial lake, and the room was full of people looking to her for a cue she did not possess. The dinner continued. It continued differently. The conversations at the main table had the quality of conversations conducted by people who are simultaneously occupied with something else, which they were. The something else was the man at the window, who seemed entirely at ease with where he had chosen to be. Catriona looked at her plate. She found, not as composed as she appeared. She was capable of maintaining composure while something quite different happened underneath, and she had been doing exactly that since he set the chair beside hers. She did not look at him. She attended to General Keir, who had moved to the aftermath of the battle, and the misery of a November crossing in damaged vessels. She asked questions where questions were called for. She was, to all outward appearances, entirely occupied by the narrative. She was not, she found, capable of forgetting that he was there. After the dinner in the entrance hall, she had collected her shawl from the housekeeper's closet and was making her way toward the back of the house when she heard her name. Miss Lyle. She stopped. She turned. He was standing in the entrance hall, which was not where she had expected anyone to come from at this hour. He had the expression she had observed at the dinner table, not the commissioner's formal manner, but the other one, the one he had been wearing when he stood and picked up his chair. "Lord Carfax," she said. "You didn't have to say it," he said. "Not a rebuke, an observation and a careful one." "Yes," she said, "I did." He was quiet for a moment. Why? She had thought about this during the general's account of the battle, in the particular way of a person who has done something and is now examining the reasoning. "Because it was true and it needed to be said," she said. "The account was wrong. The wrongness was harmful to Lady Brixton, to this household, and by implication to me. I was in a position to correct it." She paused. "The position I was given at dinner does not affect what I know or what I am able to say." He looked at her for a moment. "Most people," he said, "would have let it pass." "I know," she said. "I found I couldn't." He said, "I noticed you before Mrs. Galton spoke. You had been sitting with General Keir for 2 hours. I asked him about the lake last spring. He told me no one wanted to hear it." She looked at the floor, then at him. He has a great deal to say. And he was at Queenston Heights before Lake Erie. He has watched this colony for 30 years. "He has," Lord Carfax said, with something warmer than the commissioner's manner. "Most people don't take the time to discover that." "He was good company," she said simply. A silence. Then, "May I call tomorrow?" "I would like to continue this conversation in a setting that doesn't require either of us to manage quite so many other people." She knew what this meant. She knew the complications. She said them plainly. "I am Lady Brixton's secretary," she said. "I live in this house. A call from you will complicate my position in ways that I will absorb and you will not." "I know," he said. "She will not be pleased." "No, she will not." He looked at her with the direct attention of a man who has made a calculation and is entirely aware of its full dimensions. "I am not asking Lady Brixton." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the correspondence register and the window table and the October harbour and 2 hours of Lake Erie and the particular quality of a man who said things once and meant them completely. 10 o'clock, she said. "I have letters to post at 11. 10 o'clock, he said. He returned to the drawing room. She went up the back stairs. Behind the closed doors, the evening continued its careful social restoration of the norms that had been briefly rearranged, and neither of them was inside it, which was perhaps the evening's most relevant fact. He came at 10. Lady Brixton arranged herself in the front parlour with the clear intention of being present. Catriona sent word that she would be in the correspondence room, as she had letters requiring attention before the 11 o'clock post. He was shown to the correspondence room. It was a small room with a good north window and shelves of ledgers, and a writing desk she had organized over 14 months into a system that suited her. He looked at the room with the attention he gave everything. The ledgers, the in-tray, the correspondence register open on the desk. "This is a good room," he said. "I have spent a great deal of time in it," she said. He sat in the chair across from the writing desk. Not the formal visitor's chair, but the near chair, the one the Brixton daughters used when they came to have their letters corrected. He didn't seem to notice the difference. She did not mention it. Lady Brixton was not in the parlour, he observed. No, she said. You arranged not to be there. I arranged to be where I am required to be at this hour, she said evenly. The parlour was her arrangement. He was quiet. Then, with a quality she had been trying to name since the entrance hall, how long have you been doing that? Managing the situation without appearing to manage it. Since I arrived, she said. Lady Brixton organized this household very carefully. I found the most effective approach was to do excellent work and remain, as much as possible, in my own domain. And last night. She was quiet for a moment. Last night was different, she said. The correspondence register is not an abstraction. It is 14 months of careful, accurate work. What Mrs. Galton implied would have made it into something other than what it is. She looked at him. I could not allow that. He said, Your father. You mentioned he was a minister. He came out from Scotland in 1810, she said. He believed in this country. He was right about it. He died of a fever in the summer of 1819, before he had arranged a proper situation for me. She said it without any performance of grief. It was simply the shape of what had happened. So I arranged one myself. The position is not what either of us imagined, but it has given me a north window and General Keir's account of the lake, and, last night, a dinner that was considerably more interesting than most. He looked at her with the warmth she had been carefully managing since the entrance hall. It was, he said, the most interesting dinner I have attended in some years. They talked for 50 minutes. About the land grant survey methods, she had opinions he found considerably more informed than he had expected. About her father's library, which had apparently addressed the theology of colonial land tenure with more rigor than most seminary curricula. About Lake Ontario in October, which she had seen only from the York shoreline, and which he had crossed 3 times since his arrival and could describe in considerable detail. At 5 minutes to 11 he rose. At the door he stopped. I will call again, he said, if you are willing. Lady Brixton, she began. I know, he said. He said it without particular concern, which she found, against her own better judgment, entirely compelling. I find I am less interested in Lady Brixton's arrangements than I was at the beginning of last evening. She said, I find myself in a similar position. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. He went. She sat at the writing desk for a long moment before the 11 o'clock post and thought about whether this was wise, and arrived, with the honest clarity she brought to every calculation, at the same conclusion she had reached in the entrance hall the night before. She had found, in the specific and inconvenient way of something that arrives without mission, that she could not be sensible about him. She had been sensible her whole life. She had been sensible when she sold her father's land and taken a position in a household where she was managed as useful but never treated as equal. She had been sensible every day for 14 months. She had not been sensible in the entrance hall. She had not been sensible at the writing desk. She thought, very this once, I will not try. She opened the post ledger and prepared for the 11 o'clock. The weeks that followed were careful and deliberate. He called on Thursday. He called the following Monday. He sent a copy of a survey report he thought she might find relevant, accompanied by a note that was short and direct and said precisely what it intended to say. He attended the assembly dinner at which she was present, managing Lady Brixton's social correspondence, and he crossed the room with the unhurried purpose of a man who has decided something and does not require the room's permission to act on it. The household rearranged itself around this in the way of households. The housekeeper, Mrs. Park, began producing Catriona's morning tea with slightly better circumstances. Lady Brixton held 2 dinners in the weeks, following to which Lord Carfax was invited. He attended both. He was entirely correct. He sat where he was placed. The console table near the window was not used for any guest again, which Catriona noted without comment, because Lady Brixton was a practical woman, and the practical calculation had changed. He came on a Tuesday in November, not a Thursday, not a scheduled call day at 11 in the morning. He spoke with Lady Brixton first in the front parlour for 30 minutes. Catriona was told, afterward it had been a thorough conversation, not without the resistance Lady Brixton was constitutionally obliged to produce, but ending as Lord Carfax's conversations tended to end, at the point he had intended from the beginning. Then he was shown to the correspondence room. She was at the desk. She had known he was coming, not because anyone had told her, but because she had spent 6 weeks paying close attention to the shape of his decisions. He came in, he sat in the near chair, he said, "Lady Brixton has agreed not to obstruct." She set down her pen. She looked at him. "She is not my guardian," Catriona said. "She is my employer." "I know," he said. "I told her as much." He looked at her with the full direct attention that had been the most consistent thing about him since the dinner table. "I came to ask you, not her." She said, "What are you asking?" He said, with the precision that was his entire character, "I am asking you to consider a different situation, a permanent one. One in which your correspondence register is your own, and your north window has as much light as you choose, and General Keir comes to dinner as a guest, not as a courtesy placement." He paused. "I am asking because I have spent 6 weeks in the company of a woman who sat at a window table in a cold room and made it worth sitting at. Who corrected a lie from the position that was meant to silence her? Who could not let an untrue account stand because the truth mattered to her more than her own ease?" Another pause. "I would like her to be somewhere that quality of hers is not a liability." Catriona looked at him. She thought about the correspondence register and the entrance hall, and the 50 minutes about survey lines and lake crossings, and the particular way he listened when she spoke. Not waiting for his turn, but actually listening, the way Keir had listened when she asked about the war, the way she had listened to Keir in return. She said, "You should know I will not manage my opinions for the sake of appearances." "I had gathered that," he said. "I will have views about things, estate matters, how rooms are arranged, people." "I am counting on it," he said. "I have very few people around me who tell me things plainly. I have found I cannot do without it." Something shifted in her expression. The thing she had not quite allowed herself in 6 weeks, which was as the full, unmanaged warmth of caring about someone who had done, without proclamation or audience, the thing that was required. She said, not to him exactly, more to herself, the sentence she had been carrying since October. He moved his chair. He looked at her. "I moved my chair," he said. "Yes," she said, "you did." She said yes. It was the considered, honest yes of a woman who had been making careful calculations her whole life, and had arrived, this once, at a figure she had not planned for and did not intend to revise. She left Brixton House on a Wednesday morning in December. She carried the correspondence ledgers, which were her own work, and which Lady Brixton, to her credit, did not contest. She carried her father's Bible. And she carried a volume of survey maps that General Keir had pressed into her hands at the front door, insisting she would need them. "The surveys in the northern townships are a shambles," he said. "Someone with a good head ought to look into them properly." "I'll see what I can do," she said. He looked at her with the bright, pleased expression of a man who has found, in the last season of his life, 2 young people who listened to him as though he had something worth saying, and had been proved right about it. Lady Brixton was not in the entrance hall. She was in her parlour. It was the concession she could manage, allowing the departure to proceed without interference. Catriona respected this as she respected anything managed with dignity, even when it came late. Lord Carfax was at the front. He had come himself, not sent the carriage, which was a statement requiring no elaboration. He handed her in. He sat beside her. The carriage moved down King Street, past the bare November elms, and at the corner where the road opened toward the water, Lake Ontario appeared. Grey and enormous in the December light, extending toward a horizon you could not quite see from shore. "General Keir's surveys," she said after a moment. "Which ones?" "The northern townships. He says they're a shambles." "He's right," Lord Carfax said. "I've been meaning to address that." "I'd like to be involved," she said, "if you're willing." He looked at her with the expression she had stopped trying to manage 4 weeks ago. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. She looked out at the lake. She thought about her father, who had believed in this country and been right about it in ways he hadn't lived to see. She thought about the correspondence room and 14 months of letters written for other people's lives. She thought about a console table near a cold window and an old general talking about a battle on this very lake, and the specific sound a chair makes when someone with authority picks it up and carries it across a room toward you. She thought he moved his chair. She thought, "I am glad of it." And outside, Lake Ontario stretched on in the winter light, vast and patient and entirely indifferent to the social arrangements of any parlour in York, which was, Catriona had always thought, one of the finest things about it. And that, my dear friends, is why this story will not let us go. Not because a false remark was corrected, or a woman's work was defended, or a household found itself rearranging its calculations around a new fact, but because a man in a room full of people performing the careful mathematics of rank and consequence picked up his chair and carried it the full length of the table to sit beside the woman who had been placed at the cold window on purpose, without a speech, without a declaration, with nothing but the quiet and deliberate movement of furniture. She had sat at the side table and made it worth sitting at. She had spoken the true thing from the wrong end of the room, and he had noticed. Sometimes that is all love asks, that someone notice, and then do the small, uncelebrated, entirely correct thing. Welcome back to Moonlight at Ravenwood. If this fire is one you'd like to return to, dear friends, I hope you'll subscribe. There's another story waiting for you here every week, just like this one. Every love in these pages is hard won. Every ending is deserved. Good night.